Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me today. Here to share with you our experience report. It's called Crossing the Chasm with Kanban at JPMorgan Chase. So let me first start with introductions. My name is Adam Hsu. I work at JPMorgan Chase. I'm an organizational coach there. I've been in the IT industry for more than 20 years as a technical director, program manager, project manager, developer, agile coach, and I am an accredited Kanban trainer, Kanban management professional, and more recently, added to my title there, I am now an Okaloa Flow Lab facilitator, which I'll talk a little bit about in my presentation. So before I begin talking about my experience report, there's one thing I have to do, and it's not my choice, but just to share with you that any opinions or views that I share here on this presentation are solely mine and mine alone and do not reflect the opinions or views of JPMorgan Chase. So now we got that out of the way. I apologize for that. Let's begin with what our experience report is. How many people here are actually familiar with this graph, this normal distribution curve? Great. I was hoping for that. So that tells me many of you are familiar with this concept of crossing the chasm. A book written by Geoffrey Moore, who's an American organizational theorist, management consultant, and he wrote this phenomenal book about crossing the chasm. So those of you that didn't raise your hand, I'm going to very briefly touch upon what this is about. This normal distribution curve, some people know it as the innovation adoption curve or the technology adoption curve. And what it basically lays out in front of you is how a new concept or a new innovation is accepted into a social system. Over time, new ideas come into play, and there's different profiles that actually the different populations begin to adopt a new concept or a new idea. So on the left-hand side, you have your innovators. On the right-hand side, you have your laggards. Some of you are actually probably familiar with some of these terms if you follow tech at all. And these are segmented into different percentages. You have the first 2.5% who are the innovators that adopt very early. Then you have your early adopters. Your early majority come on at about 34%. And this chasm that Geoffrey Moore talks about is this time frame where a lot of new innovations either make it or they completely fail. Society just does not accept that new idea. And it's a struggle for a lot of new innovations to actually pull through the chasm. So the big idea is, how do you cross this chasm? And we're going to talk about that. The remainder of the right-hand side of the normal distribution curve is, as you would expect, 34 for late majority and the remaining 16% for laggards. So the reason why I'm talking to you about this innovation adoption curve is because I'm going to use this as the canvas to tell you our story of how we were able to help our organization at JPMorgan Chase begin to adopt agile practices. And we leverage Kanban to help it cross that particular chasm for us. So the important concept here is that chasm. So let me just quickly talk about that. The chasm, as an example, for those of you who are familiar with this, should be very, very easy. The chasm is where some new innovations don't take place. So some good example is maybe the Segway or virtual reality or electric cars. All of those are fantastic new innovation and concepts that are good for society. But you don't see us all driving around on Segways. We're not all wearing virtual reality helmets. And not every one of us is driving an electric car today. However, a different innovation, the iPad, is pretty predominant. And you find it in any teenager's hand, and even grandma and grandpas are using it at their houses. So that was an innovation that took on. So let me first begin by telling you the beginning of our journey, the first year when we began adopting agile practices. So the first year, we titled it the Hammers for Sale theme. And this is about the law of the instrument. So simply put, the law of the instrument is best quoted as, for any man whose only tool is the hammer, every problem to him seems like a nail, right? And why do I bring this up? In our organization, the only word that was uttered about Agile was Scrum. So much so that Scrum was interchangeable with Agile. You're doing Agile, you're doing Scrum. That's all there was in our organization. So, that being said, back in 2013, I was dubbed the change agent for our particular organization. So JPMorgan Chase is a very large and old company, and we have over 40,000 technologists, which is a pretty scary number if you think about it. It's actually larger than some major tech companies. We employ that many because we have large enterprise systems that are very complex. And then it takes about that many to support it. Well, maybe not. But the organization that I belonged to had roughly over 1,000 people. And my executive director, who brought me on at the time, dubbed me the change agent for his organization, and he saw the writing on the wall. Our organization had not really adopted any Agile frameworks at this time. And he saw that the industry, especially financial industries, which tends to be the laggards in adopting new concepts, many of our competitors had already started adopting Agile. You probably heard Capital One here was just talking about, right? So he saw the writing on the wall, and rather than waiting for top-down management to come in and say, you know what, I want you to begin doing Agile, he said, you know what, we're gonna take this head on. And so he gave me the task of doing an assessment first of his organization and trying to understand what people were doing, what teams were doing in order to, and how they worked today. So what I did was I spent about 2 months just assessing his organization and the way that they work and how the phase gates worked and how work was handed off and where they were located and how often they actually worked with with each other teams, and their businesses. And on a fateful day in December, he said, all right, you've collected all this data. I would like for you to now present it to my team, my executive team, and share with them what you found. And not only that, I would like for you to now put the path forward on how we can begin to embrace agility for our business partners in our organization. So I sat in front of him and all of his directs and presented the assessments. And it was no surprise to them. They all knew who they were. Nobody really claimed, maybe except 1 or 2 teams said they were doing Agile, but they really weren't. They were doing, iterative waterfall in the best way they could. But really, it was just all phase gating, right? A lot of software delivery in that model. So smart enough, our executive director said, okay, I accept that. I actually expected that from my organization. I want you, and he was challenging his directs, I want you to go out and do something different. I want you to do something different. Now notice the term that he used here, right? He wasn't prescriptive about saying, hey, I want you to go out and implement Scrum or any other type of framework. He said, I want you to do something different. The way that we work today is not, it's frustrating our customers, it's frustrating our business partners, it's frustrating you, our technologists. So I want you to show me that you can do something different, right? So this was brilliant. This tells you that our leader is someone who actually believes in providing compelling direction rather than telling us how to get there, right? So he just said, here's the goal. I want you to go out and do that. And so he did. Something that happened as he said that, you can just sense it in the room. Everybody was nervous because, again, this wasn't the first time of trying to adopt Agile in our organization. Maybe not for this particular one, but we've seen a lot of coming and goings of trying to adopt Agile. And many of them stalled or completely failed. This is not a new story for you that this is happening. So there was a lot of nervousness, and nobody was really willing to raise their hand yet. But I had 2 aces up my sleeve. Luckily enough for me, when I was doing this assessment, I ran into a couple of people that actually had implemented a successful implementation of Scrum at the time, all right? So I spoke to them, and actually these 2 folks, I'll name them Jason and Natalie, were part of a self-organizing, cross-functional, small co-located team with a very strong relationship with their business partner. So they had all of the makings of a great, successful implementation of Scrum. So I asked them, what did you do? How did you get to this place? How did you get your executive and your executives to support? How did you get your business partners to actually support you in getting to this model? And they told me their story. And it was such a compelling story that I invited them to this meeting. And I said, you know what, to my executive director, I like to bring in a couple of guests and actually have them kind of tell those story. And they sat down in front of them and told them how it worked and how they became a self-organizing team. And I said, if we're going to try to do this, we have to actually maybe try to follow this model. And he wholeheartedly agreed. He said, all right, if that's the right way to go, that's what we're going to do. And again, at the time, all we knew in our organization was Scrum, right? So what happened? We left the room and said, all right, let's see who actually bites. So as we were leaving, and I was heading to my garage, one of his directs, one of these managers, came running up to me. He said, Adam, hold on. Before you leave, I wanted to catch you before you left. I'm really excited about what you just described to me and bring Jason and Natalie to kind of explain how this can actually play out. I would like for my teams to be the first one to start. I want to wholeheartedly adopt what you've just described to me. So we had our first innovator here who is willing to begin adopting Scrum. So this is a good thing. We now have somebody who's willing to raise their hand. What was actually happening here is some persuasion was actually occurring. How many people are familiar with the book Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, written by Robert Cialdini? Right? So if you read this book, there are 6 main principles that Cialdini talks about in what persuades people to actually, and what motivates them to actually do things. And there are 6. The liking principle, reciprocity, social proof, commitment, consistency, authority, and scarcity. I'm not going to go through each one, but I will highlight scarcity was really at play here, right? Our executive director basically told his directs, I want you to do something different, and I just want you to try it. What I don't want to see is we come back a year from now or 6 months from now and nobody is doing it. So he basically said, it's okay for you to try something different. It's okay to fail, right? I want you to do this. This guy was smart enough to come run after me and say, I want to be the first, because our leader said it's okay to do that. So scarcity principle, because I was only one guy at the time with my colleague here, Gabe, who were beginning to look at how we can actually help our organization. So there was also a little bit of play of authority here, because I brought in some folks who actually lived what being on a real Scrum team was like. So they actually deferred to them as the authority figures and said, you know what, if they can do it, we can do it as well. So that played in as well. So just a quick profile of the innovator that I mentioned to you. These are known as your tech enthusiasts, right? They are the people who like to drive change. They're okay with failing fast and being able to experiment. They have a high risk tolerance. Most of these people in this category want to just try something new just to try it, because it's the newest thing out there. They're on the bleeding edge. They're internally motivated to actually change. And usually these folks are the ones that actually influence the early adopters on this distribution curve. So let's talk a little bit about our early adopters. Our early adopters are your evangelists, or sometimes called your visionaries. These folks are not like the innovators. They're not just jumping out there because it's the newest thing out there. They do want to embrace change, and they have more of a commitment to making sure that using their own capabilities to make things work. So these are people who are taking a look at, you know, what's the next opportunity that actually can make a difference for me. So they want to get ahead of the rest of the mass population. So they also have a profile of liking to try it before they buy. They take measured risks, and they are part of the leading edge, not the bleeding edge, and more motivated to integrate new ideas that are useful for what they need to do. And they influence the larger majority here. Okay, so I talked to you a little bit about our early adopters. So we had our first one, and how she came about was because our innovator actually influenced her. He shared his story as we began converting these teams over and began adopting Scrum. And she said to us, you know, we're really inspired by what we saw here, and I think we can make it work for our teams as well. So she went ahead and adopted Scrum, and Again, some of the Cialdini principles were in effect here, most likely scarcity, because she wanted to get ahead of the pack. So then we had her talk to the rest of her peers, and we said, you know what, you need to share your story as well to the rest of your peers. And we had another person that came to us, another director of our executive director, and he said, you know what, I see what you're doing with the other teams, and I see that it could play out, but my team is different. We're not software delivery. My team actually manages a lot of the risk here in our organization, and I don't think Scrum is appropriate for us. So he's the first one to come to us and say, you know what, Scrum may not work for us. And at this time, our innovator came back to us and said, you know what, our teams are now leveraging Scrum, but you know what, we have this special market annual event that actually occurs, and we just don't see how this is going to fit in with sprints and the way things work in Scrum. So I'm a little concerned here. So then also our first early adopter came back to us and said, you know what, my teams are struggling with Scrum right now because there's so much other demand that they're having to take care of while they're trying to do software delivery. And we have all of this ad hoc stuff that's coming to us. So right now, for these three, Scrum doesn't seem like it's a good fit. It's not fit for purpose for what they're trying to do. So this began a conversation about, well, what else can we do? And for us, for me as a change agent, I was well aware of Kanban, but had just begun researching Kanban and what that is all about. So I spoke to a few other coaches out there and began learning about what Kanban is. And this is actually where we found ourselves in year 2. And this is the title of, What Do You Know About Kanban? So again, did some research, of course, read David's Blue Book, got a good understanding of at least what the teachings of Scrum is. And from that, we began using this as a model for some of these teams that were struggling. And what we did was we actually came up with our own Kanban 101 class, right? So we started educating these teams. We taught them Little's Law. We began teaching them how to visualize work, and we used the pizza game or the airplane game, probably some of you are familiar with that, to show through simulation how Kanban works. And again, we taught them the 6 general principles of Kanban, right? So in these classes we taught that we targeted these 3 groups, we had 25 plus people for 7 months straight, and we opened it up to the general population. What we found was there was a lot of demand and high interest for what we were teaching, and there was more people wanting to take Kanban than we could actually schedule for. But we had some very good constructive criticism come back to us too. They told us, you know what, that airplane game is a lot of fun, and we enjoyed it thoroughly, but it really doesn't represent what we do. We do software delivery. We're not building airplanes, right? So that's a fair statement. The other thing is you covered a lot of great contents in theory, but how do we do this in the real world, right? How do we implement this? You're not teaching us how to do this, right? And again, we had just put this class together based on what we understood about Kanban, and these are very good feedback that we got. So we said, all right, we need to take a step back and really do some more, and dig a little bit deeper about learning about Kanban. However, it did help 2 of our leaders. First one was our innovator who came in and said, you know what, we started leveraging Kanban, and it actually helped us with our annual event. We were extremely responsive to our business partners, always changing their needs and their demands. And we were actually able to address our market event in the most successful iteration we've ever had. So they were thrilled. The early adopter, also very similar positive response. She said, you know what, now my Scrum teams can focus on the sprint Scrum work, and I have another team that's actually focusing on all of the other technical internal things that actually need to happen, right? So she was seeing some great positive results from it. Our second early adopter said this. So we've adopted Kanban, and we see that there's some great positives to it, and I'm seeing some good quality of work coming out. But where's all this metrics that you told us would be there, right? There's some great empirical data that comes along with Kanban. That's what I read. You know, what's a lead time histogram? What's the difference between cycle time and lead time? How do we create a cumulative flow diagram? So all of these questions started coming up from this particular leader. And we recognized that we need to dig even further into Kanban. And also, we were actually curious because we had been teaching so many Kanban classes for 7 months. We were curious to see how many teams were actually adopting Kanban. And we walked around and looked at our floor, and what we saw was a lot of adoption of personal Kanbans. People had personal Kanban boards at their desks. Leaders had personal Kanban boards in their offices, managing their daily demand. We also saw some teams actually start leveraging an aggregated personal Kanban board. So again, everybody has their own lanes. They weren't really working together, but at least this displayed and visualized what the team was doing. So we saw some of this. And we also saw some team Kanban boards come up. And again, it didn't represent their actual flow of work. It was just the backlog, next, in progress, and done. Very simplistic, no policies in place, but at least they got the concept of using WIP. So these were very shallow implementations of Kanban, and we thought, all right, this is what we expect because we just started. And at the time, our leaders that had already begun adopting Kanban, we asked them to continue to talk to their peers and share the story of how now Kanban is another component that could be leveraged with heading towards agility. So they spoke to another peer here, and this one came to us and said, you know what, I've spoken to my peers, I understand what you're doing, you're actually leveraging Scrum, and where it's fit for purpose, and you're leveraging Kanban, depending on the nature of the work. Now, I'm maybe willing to adopt it, but I need some assurances, right? Because I have a very large organization, and probably about 60 or 70 people, and I need to make sure that the demand that's coming in can be balanced, because I have a lot of work that our business wants to do, and I have a lot of work that we need to internally still take care of. I need some assurances that this can play out. Can you help me further? So again, digging deep, we understood that we can leverage both Scrum and Kanban, and then we went out there and started looking into static, right? So we found out some of the feedback that we got from those people that actually took our class started leading us to begin researching how we could actually leverage static system thinking approach to implementing Kanban as a way to get these teams to get better. So I went out there, looked at the videos, read the books. Mike Burrows describes it very well in his book, how you should do it. And it's all about helping them first identifying their sources of dissatisfaction, right? Both internally, externally, and then mapping those out, right? And then analyzing the team's capability and the demand coming in, right? And seeing, does that really actually play out? Is there actual balance between that? And finding out where the imbalance is. And then modeling their actual flow, right? How their work currently happens today, as it is. And then helping them realize that they need to look at their demand differently, right? They need to look at it and say, and categorize it and say, we have different risks here. We need to classify them as classes of service. So we took them through the full static approach. Now this, again, was on our own, did our own research, researched it out there, and luckily enough for us, this was a good implementation. And they began seeing a lot of results from it and seeing some great things out of it. But we said to ourselves, you know what, that's not good enough. We're professionals here, we need to do better. And by doing better, we need to take a quote from Michael Jackson. We need to take a good long look at ourselves, right? If we're going to teach and coach people on how to use Kanban, we need to be professionals. So that's when we started coming in and started engaging with Lean Kanban University. We attended the Miami North America Lean Kanban conference, and we were just blown away by the amount of knowledge, the thought leaders, and we said, this is where we need to go. These are great things that we could bring as an alternative path to agility for our organization. And further to that, we learned about how we could actually potentially become accredited Kanban trainers. And we did that. And we went to Seattle. So we went to Mecca, if you will. And we learned from Dragos Dimitrios. And we learned from Janice Linden Reed. And having that time with them, having them personally explain their own business case on how they leverage Kanban to actually turn a whole IT organization around at Microsoft, or how they Kanbanized Scrum in Janice's organization was so impactful for us, and we took so much of that learning back with us. And we said, you know what, this is what we need to begin doing for our organization as well. So the next year is all about exploitation and communication, and this is aligned with Jeffrey Moore's strategy on how do you actually cross the chasm. He calls this the D-Day scenario. You need to actually establish a beachhead, attack it from a market segmentation, have a plan of how you're going to attack, and then deploy. That's what we did. We said we need to exploit our problems here that we know of. And we got a lot of feedback from our technology teams, from our Scrum teams, and they shared some great insights with us about some of the Scrum implementations that they were doing. One of them I really like that I want to point out is we have a lot of technology teams that are utilities to other teams. They didn't have a true product owner. So in Scrum, you're forcing somebody to become the product owner where there is none, right? There's just all this demand coming in, and you're asking them, go ahead, I want you to act as a product owner and prioritize this work. And they're like, I don't know, it's whatever's coming in at us, right? So that was not fit for purpose. We still have a lot of teams that were trying to do Scrum, but they were still pulling in too much work, right? They didn't get the understanding of limiting the work in progress. So they were still overcommitting, and they didn't truly feel that pull behavior, right? That feeling of pull. So there was a lot of constraints with Scrum and a lot of dissatisfaction. This was our niche, right? This is where we said, you know what? We could actually bring more insight and more learning and actually getting teams to feel what it feels like to actually deliver in a service delivery framework. We need to be able to help them, and we need to leverage Kanban by doing this. So at this time, we did that. That was our plan. The other component that we leveraged is more social proof, over-communicating. Again, this is anchoring on Robert Cialdini's Persuasion's principles. And we had a lot of social proof now. We had a lot of teams beginning to adopt Kanban. So we encouraged interpersonal communications. We actually encouraged our leaders that had their teams begin to adopt, talk to other leaders and say, tell your story to them, because they're going to be the ones that are going to trust you because they're in the exact same situation. We actually even had an expert panel. We have an annual event that we have internally as a conference where we put the teams on a stage and actually they share their story of how they actually went through their journey. And they shared how they leveraged Kanban or Scrum to actually find that agility. So we did that. And then we also did mass communication, right? So we have newsletters internally. We constantly wrote stories about the successes teams were having by leveraging Kanban, right? And that was our approach. You probably keep hearing me talk about persuasion a lot. And the reason why I do this is because this innovation adoption curve, or this normal distribution, is based on that. What it is a new idea that is adopted by a social system, and a lot of it has to do with persuasion. So the original book that was actually written about this adoption curve is written by Everett Rogers. It's called The Diffusion of Innovations. And what he says is, the process by which any innovation is communicated through channels and then adopted over time among members of a social system, that is the diffusion of innovation, right? Innovation, communication channels, time, and social system, right? You're actually introducing a new concept into a system. So within the book, and I'm not going to go into all of this, there are 5 stages of what's known as the innovation decision process. Either how a new idea or concept or practice is going to be adopted or rejected by a social system. And you can see there's different stages here, from the first one, knowledge, to persuasion, decision, implementation, confirmation. A key component is the persuasion factor. Persuasion is mostly affected by the perceived attributes of that innovation. And there's 5 attributes there. Relative advantage. How much is this new concept, new idea going to be better than what we're doing today? Compatibility. How compatible is the new idea actually to what we need to do? Complexity. Is it complex? Is this something that's going to take me a long time to learn how to do, or is it something easy? trialability. Can we try this out before we actually fully commit? And finally, observability. Can we see actual results coming from this new innovation? And there's a key word here, perceived. It's not objective, it's perceived, right? A lot of it is, this is a social system, what people are talking about and how they perceive success or not, and wanting to adopt this. So we knew that was part of our strategy in exploiting our niche and making more social proof evident. So at this point, we have talked about how we established our strategy. Again, we came back and presented what we had learned at Lean Kanban University. And we came back to our innovator and our early adopters, and we showed them what we could actually provide them. We said there's an actual alternative path to agility, right? So we don't have to go just Scrum. There's actually a better way here. And they were thrilled to hear it when we shared it with them. And actually, we invited them to the first few classes that we had, and they were blown away by it. So our innovators, early adopters said, you know what, this is great. And we're going to recommend that we start with this. Let's start with the Team Kanban practitioner and then the Kanban system design as a starting point for our teams to begin adopting Kanban. As expected, our innovator, how much money? Go ahead, get it started. Our early adopters, I'm thrilled to see this is actually something I can get ahead of the pack with, right? This one, right? This early adopter who was a little bit wary of not seeing the empirical evidence, this is exactly what I wanted to see, right? Now we're actually creating lead time histograms. We're actually using the data to actually support this model. So he was very excited. And then our last early adopter said, you know what? I see how this can really add value to the way we do things. And not only that, I wish we could leverage this for the intake demand that we're addressing. So what she's talking about is actually not in just software delivery, before it even comes in. This is an important key point. So again, we asked her, hey, can you go ahead and now share your story of this and how you're adopting it with the rest of your peers? Sure, glad to do it. What we didn't realize at the time was this early adopter was really our first early majority, all right? She put us over the edge because with her joining on, and she was known to be very much as the pragmatist, right? So these folks are your pragmatics. These are the people who wants to see pure success happen before they even try it. They're very risk aware. They are part of the mass market, and they're motivated to adopt once it's been established, right? So we nurtured some of these relationships along the way, and we created a lot of social proof. And we used that influence to get them to come along with us on the journey. And really, one of our first adopters turned into our first early majority because we focused on her. At this point, we had been doing this for about 3 years now. There was a checkpoint. Our senior manager came back and said, you know what, this is great. I see a lot of you are doing some great things, and you're doing things differently. I see you. So who's next? And all of a sudden, everybody started falling in line. Social proof was there, right? They now said, hey, you know what? We can make this work. And we're not just going Scrum. There's actually other ways to actually find agility. And we still have our naysayers. We still have them today. Some people who just don't want to get on board. That's natural. That's okay. We accept that. Again, Robert Cialdini's Persuasion, very much at play here. More social proof. And now authority. Other teams explaining and telling their story of how they did it, and they actually influenced the mass. And what happened? Halfway through this year, they deepened our chasm. They said, how do you normally get rewarded for doing a great job? They give you more work. Remember that 40,000? Well, they gave us a bigger piece of the pie. They said, you're doing such a great job, we want you to now tackle 5,000 of our 40,000. That's a lot of work. So that was now our new plan. So one thing that we were very aware of, now that that happened, part of what I talked about in Crossing the Chasm is that approach of focusing on your market segment, right? And that's a key concept. We knew we still had a good portion of our organization that we still needed to get moving along, and now they added on another 4,000 people. That's a lot of folks. Our strategy was not to begin going into that new market segment. We wanted to make sure that we had completely dominated our current market segment, that we helped our organization get towards adopting some form of agility before we even looked at our second segment. I think some of the best testimonials we get from our journey is the simulation, right? So some of the simulations that we ran in our Kanban system delivery classes, it really opened up the eyes of a lot of people. They felt what pull really feels like. The game basically teaches the class. There's so much packed into the Get Kanban simulation, and we really appreciated that. It made teaching Kanban so much easier. And again, we balanced this with everything we needed to teach. Luckily for us, we actually were, we ran into Patrick Sayert and Arlette Verkamen, and they were putting out something called Okalo Flow Lab. And we were lucky enough to be part of the first beta testers. And this was yet another tool that we used to supplement our teachings and getting teams along with understanding. Remember that early adopter that said, you know, I wish we could do something about that intake demand. This became a tool. They actually invited the business to come over and come into class and begin learning this. And we used this to kind of show how you need to look at your entire system, not just software delivery. You need to look at everything above that too, and look at how work is being presented to your software delivery teams. And there was a lot of great concepts. Teams sitting along with their product owners, learning at the same time, and feeling, again, that experience of pull. And they also have scenarios where you can starve your system, right? So there's another great tool that teaches you that if you don't address the whole system and your software delivery team is finally getting to work much quicker, but no work is coming in, you've broken your system, right? So this was another great tool that we leverage. And there's a lot of other simulations that they run here with this Okalo Flow Lab. So if you're interested, please talk to Patrick and Arlette. They will, and actually we have the workshop on Wednesday. So please, if you can, attend those. Product owner said, you know what, this is the most fun I've ever had attending a learning session, and it actually applies to the way we work. I'm definitely taking this back, and I'm going to talk to my business peers about attending this and getting them to start thinking about their entire system and the way they work with their software delivery teams. And one of the problem moments we had was we had one of our Kanban team, one of our teams that adopted Scrum, short of a year, came back to us and said, you know what, we've been trying Scrum, and it's painful. It feels like we're constrained. It feels like we're in meetings all the time. It feels like we can't get anything done. We spend more time trying to refine the work than we're actually doing the work. Can we just go ahead and switch over fully to Kanban? Because these guys actually went to our Kanban sessions, right? And they were our proof that the big ideas was starting to take place. And we said, sure, we would love to teach you how to do that. And we did. We coached them along, and we got them to fully adopt. And they were ready for it. This was a point at which they came to us. We weren't trying to force it. They said, you know what, Scrum is just not fit for purpose for us. We need to do something different. And for them, it was to switch over to Kanban. And now they're very, very happy. The entire teams are dynamically going and pulling work as it's ready and not spending so much time trying to refine it ahead. So another example was just, again, some testimonial for one of the teams. And this was a try and buy situation in a different location. And they said, you know what, let's try it for 2 months. And overwhelmingly, in just a short period of time, they came back and said, you know what, we see how our work is becoming more predictive. We see the transparency that's happening. We see how the pull model really works with Kanban. Can you come back and teach the rest of our teams? So this was, again, another testament. So the last one that we did was an engagement with a team that really wanted to fully adopt upstream and downstream. And this is actually a good visualization of that. They wanted to partner closely with their business because their business actually didn't have a single product owner. They had 3, right? And we can't force all 3 to become one person. Instead, what we told them is, look at this as different services, right? And I know we called this scale, but really all it is was helping them do what they do today, but looking at them differently as different services and balancing that with the capabilities that they have, right? And we had a lot of teams that weren't even in their capabilities in doing the work. So we helped them recognize how they can actually take a look at it, and based on their classes of service, begin looking at how they can start balancing that out. And this was a large implementation, about 140 people on a team in 4 different locations, right? And they've started on their journey to begin doing that. So I'm running out of time. I apologize. I keep seeing the paddle back there, but I'll just quickly go through the rest of this. We've seen Kanban become very much demanded in our organization. So we've gone quite a few places helping to spread the word. And the big ideas I want to end with is nurture your early adopters. Persuade them to talk to the early majority. Help them come along on your journey. Your pragmatists are your big buyers. These are the people who are going to really influence the rest of the organization to come along. Look for those patterns where you can establish a niche, right? And see where maybe Scrum is not the right approach. You need to come in and say, you know what, we have a different way, and Kanban can lead you there. Use social proof throughout your entire adoption. The more opportunities you can help spread the news, the better. And then focus on a market segment first, right? So we were lucky enough that we had a first market segment that we focused on. Our executive was very understanding, said, hold off on the second part. So you need some leadership to actually come into play here. So he was very smart. He said, you know what, I get that all of you want to get started, but we need to finish what we're doing here, and your executives can help you with that. So that's counting on some leadership there. So I know I'm out of time, but that is our journey on how we leverage Kanban to actually cross the chasm in helping our organization adopt Kanban. Thank you very much.